Masashi grew up under harsh conditions in his village. His parents died when after a disease spread through the area. And even his relatives refused to take him in. He remained sitting outside their house for days, starving and without hope, until they finally accepted him under strict and humiliating conditions. The villagers treated him with open hostility because he associated with two people linked to the Bushi and admired them, and because he did not show the same reverence toward the Oni as the rest of the village. He endured this life until he entered the village school, where students were trained to become miners who extracted the metals consumed by the Oni. There, Masashi was seen breaking rocks with his large sickle, and his classmates were astonished by his strength. They took pride in him being part of their section, even though he himself felt no pride and had no desire to be there. They gathered around him as he stood tense and restrained, asking with excitement how he managed to extract the legendary ore, and insisting that he would surely be the top student that year. They lifted his heavy weapon in disbelief at how he handled it and continued to praise him, yet a deep tension remained within him. Later in history class, the teacher spoke of a group called the Bushi, describing them as evil and hated for occupying the city of Hinamoto for 150 years. She claimed their rule was unjust, that they oppressed farmers and ruled through violence. The students reacted with anger, whispering among themselves about the cruelty of the Bushi. Musashi remained silent, knowing he alone understood what truly happened, and that the Bushi were the ones who resisted the Oni. His thoughts drifted back to his childhood, training with swords alongside his friend Kojiro. The two of them were carefree then. Kojiro's father stepped outside and told them to rest, inviting them into the house. Sitting with them, he explained that the Bushi were the ones who stood against the Oni, and that the Oni were the force that seized control of Hinamoto. He said the fight was still ongoing, and that there was hope they would one day be defeated. The boys listened with wide eyes. Kojiro asked with concern whether the Bushi could truly defeat such massive monsters. Masashi answered without hesitation that they could, as long as they fought together with their comrades. Kojiro grew excited at the idea, and Masashi agreed that they would become Bushi themselves and travel the land to fight the Oni. The memory faded, and Masashi returned to the present, which stood in complete contrast. He watched the teacher with visible contempt as she instructed the class to recite the Oni hymn. Once again, he considered declaring that he belonged to the Bushi, but, as always, he remained silent. When class ended, his classmates invited him to celebrate the school entrance ceremony with them. He declined, apologizing and saying there were things he still needed to take care of. He made his way to Kojiro's house and smiled the moment he arrived, as though he had come home. As soon as he stepped inside, Kojiro told him to go back to his own house. Musashi laughed it off and asked for something to eat. Kojiro told him to eat at home instead. When Musashi asked why, Kojiro snapped that his entrance ceremony was the next day, and that he should not be wasting his time there. Musashi's expression changed. He replied calmly that he would probably end up as a miner after all, and that was why he had come to talk about something important. He gripped his sickle, drawing Kojiro's attention. When Kojiro asked why he had brought it, Musashi said it was his weapon, the one he would use to fight the Oni, just as he had promised, and that they would form a Bushi team together. He explained that for 5 years he had trained by using the sickle and digging so he could fight properly. Kojiro reacted with anger, even as a faint smile threatened to appear. He told Musashi that it would not happen. Seeing Musashi's confusion, Kojiro continued explaining that he and his father were actually of Bushi blood, and that this was why the town treated them with contempt. He said his father had lied before dying, telling stories to make things easier for them, and that everything about the Bushi being heroes and the Oni being monsters was false. Musashi stood stunned by Kojiro's words and shouted that he should remember what his father had said, that the Bushi never give up on their dreams. Kojiro answered with cold sarcasm, accusing Musashi of no longer taking any of it seriously. He pointed out that Musashi went to the Ani school every day and repeated their pledge about dreaming of becoming a miner. Musashi had no answer, knowing it was true. Kojiro told him not to speak of dreams or fighting the Oni when his actions said otherwise, questioning how he could believe him at all. Anger rose in Musashi, and he declared that he would prove his resolve. He ran out of the house, while Kojiro followed him outside, telling him that he deserved a normal life. At sunset, Kojiro stood gathering trash from the ground while the people around him mocked him, ridiculed his sword, and hurled garbage in his direction. This treatment followed him because of his Bushi bloodline. As he endured it, his mind returned to his childhood at school, when a teacher explained that the law forced the Bushi to always carry their swords because it defined who they were. She described them as criminals and blamed them for the long wars between nations. The students turned their eyes toward Kojiro, whispering among themselves, while he struggled to keep his composure and hold back his tears. After school, he would walk through the streets with a chain and weight attached to his body, his sword bound tightly to him, hearing voices mutter that the son of a filthy Bushi had arrived. In those moments that wished that Musashi would never share the same fate, believing that becoming a miner would offer him a far better life than the one he was trapped in. The next day, the Oni Gate entrance ceremony began. The students greeted the spectators with excitement, their faces filled with anticipation, except for Musashi, whose thoughts remained fixed on Kojiro's words. He was troubled by Kojiro's doubt, and carried that weight as they passed through the first gate and climbed the stairs. The others grew more excited, knowing they were about to see the Oni leaders. Musashi, in contrast, felt his resolve harden, forming the intention to kill one of the Oni leaders to prove that Kojiro was wrong. The leader's servants collected the students' weapons and opened the door. What awaited them left the students frozen, as they saw that the Oni leaders were monsters who fed on humans. The servants ordered them to extract stones until death for the sake of the Oni. Terror spread as the students witnessed the Oni beating and devouring those who failed to work. Many collapsed to the ground, realizing that everything they had believed until now was a lie. Musashi remained standing, his body tense, stating that he had known from the beginning they were monsters, and that being there marked the first step toward his dream. He moved toward one of the Oni and reached for his sickle, only to find it missing. Shock crossed his face as he remembered handing it over at the gate. The servants and Oni had already recognized him as an enemy, and their hostility turned toward him. Musashi spotted an axe on the ground, left behind by a worker who had been eaten, and ran to seize it. Elsewhere, Kojiro sat alone, thinking of Musashi. He recalled their days training together with swords and scolded himself for dwelling on it, not wanting Musashi to be bound by the Bushi blood and its fate. His eyes fell on Musashi's bag. He wiped it clean, and a notebook slipped out. Opening it, he discovered Musastan since entering the school, realizing that he had been targeting one of the Oni from the start. Back at the site, Musashi gripped the axe, but the Oni struck it away. His classmates begged him to surrender so he would not die, yet he forced himself back to his feet, blood covering his body. He advanced again, only to be struck down once more. He continued to rise, until the Oni grabbed his clothes and prepared to end his life with its claws. At that moment Kojiro arrived on a motorcycle, leaping down onto the Oni. He handed Musashi his large sickle and spoke sharply, acknowledging that Musashi had been training all along while pretending to be a minor. Musashi stood and replied that he had always taken this seriously, and that he could not fault Kojiro for doubting him. The Oni charged at them in rage. Musashi assumed a stance he had studied carefully. With a precise swing he cut the Oni in two. Kojiro watched in stunned silence, while the other students stared in disbelief at how easily Musashi had defeated it. The servants dropped to their knees, shaken by what they had seen. The remaining Oni leaders transformed into massive monsters, and Kojiro stepped beside Musashi as they fought and cut them down together. When it was over, Musashi reached out his hand to Kojiro, asking him to form their Bushi team, but the ground suddenly trembled. They turned toward the mountains and saw beams of light rising into the sky. Fear spread among everyone present, recognizing it as the sign of the awakening of the Kishin, the greatest of the Oni and their leader. The others fled in panic while Kojiro and Musashi remained behind, continuing to fight and destroy the remaining Oni. They rode the motorcycle with Kojiro at the controls, while Musashi struck down Oni as they moved. Passing through the Oni gate, they soon encountered a strange creature shaped like a massive bird. Both were taken aback when they realized this was meant to be the Kishin. Musashi advanced and cut it in half with a single strike, leaving Kojiro stunned by how easily it fell. Musashi warned him it was not finished, and moments later the Kishin's body rejoined, restoring itself. The servants arrived with a cart carrying an unusual metal. The Kishin seized it and devoured it, releasing a surge of energy as its form expanded into a towering demon. Kojiro tried to flee with Musashi, but the Kishin struck the ground, sending them flying from the motorcycle. 6 arms emerged from its body, and the servants stated that for the first time in 5 years, it had revealed its true form. Kojiro looked over and saw Musashi lying unconscious. The Kishin roared and clutched Koro's sword with its claws. The miners shouted that the Kishin fed on swords and that he had to let go. Kojiro refused, holding on because the sword had been given to him by his father. The Kishin slammed him into the ground and crushed him against the rocks until his grip failed. The sword slipped free. The Kishin consumed the sword, and the miners rushed to Kojiro's side. He lay there furious and shaken, knowing that sword represented his pride as a Bushi. At that moment Musashi regained consciousness and charged toward the Kishin. He climbed onto its body, reached its stomach, and began striking with his sickle. The surface resisted his blows, but he continued, forcing cracks to form. The Kishin lashed out in anger, missing him and striking itself repeatedly until the weakened area began to give way. Musashi delivered the final strike, breaking through. The Kishin screamed and collapsed, losing consciousness. Musashi fell into the acidic depths, then emerged holding the sword. He walked toward Kojiro and returned it to him. Kojiro thanked him, saying it meant everything to him. Musashi replied calmly that he understood its value and told him not to lose it again. Kojiro felt his resolve return, and with it his desire to become a Bushi. Musashi, seeing this, said that defeating the Kishin would be their first true achievement. A warning suddenly echoed from the servants about an approaching Bushi squad. Musashi and Kojiro climbed a high tower, and saw a moving fortress tearing through mountains as it advanced. When it reached the city barrier, the Bushi squad burst forth on motorcycles, and struck the barrier, tearing open a massive breach as they entered the city. When they landed, energy surged from their swords, lifting them as they moved. Their leader approached Masashi and Kojiro, and told them the area was too dangerous for children, and ordered them to evacuate. Masashi replied that they were not children, that they were bushi, and that they had defeated the Kishin. The leader reacted with surprise and asked if they had done so by cutting its stomach, then laughed dismissively, saying that was not enough. He gestured for Musashi to look. Musashi turned and saw the Kishin healing its wound and rising once more. The leader placed a hand on Musashi's shoulder and told him not to worry, assuring him they would handle it, and that he should run somewhere safe. Musashi remained still, staring at the Kishin as it released a massive wave of energy that shook the land. Kojiro urged Musashi to retreat, agreeing that the bushi were right. Musashi refused, saying this was meant to be their first reward, and that the bushi were taking it from them. He tightened his grip on his sickle and tried to move closer, but the pressure of the energy forced him back. Kojiro warned that getting any closer would burn him. Musashi answered that he would rather burn than let their achievement be taken, stating that this moment was meant to be their first step toward the dream they shared as children, and that he was ready to risk his life for it. The servants released several oni to block them. Masashi cut them down with forceful strikes, while Kojiro stood watching, unable to understand how Masashi had reached this point. On a distant mountain, the bushi observed the scene. One of them, Oshi, remarked that Musashi was a troublesome miner. Shunrai questioned whether he might be a bushi from another land. Aoshi dismissed the idea, noting his unrefined style despite his solid technique. Their leader, Naotora, stepped forward and announced it was time to finish the Kishin. His attention lingered on Musashi's fight. One of his subordinates warned him not to risk himself for peasants from Aki, but Naotora refused, saying there was no purpose in defeating the Kishin if people were not saved. He watched Musashi closely, remarking that he was his favorite kind of fool. Musashi charged toward the Kishin. The servants laughed at the sight, certain that defeating it in such a way was impossible. Kojiro watched him with a heavy expression, admitting to himself that he could not act with the same recklessness. Musashi leapt forward and struck the Kishin's belly with his sickle, breaking it once more, only for it to regenerate again. At that moment, Shinrai of the bushi restrained him with an energy rope, and pulled him up toward the mountain. Musashi protested angrily, demanding to know why they were stopping him, and insisting that this creature was meant to be his first reward. Naotora asked him what that reward was for, and Musashi answered without hesitation that it was for his dream. Naotora responded with a cold tone, telling him he was underestimating the situation. He explained that they were a bushi squad and could not allow a reckless child to run freely across the battlefield. Musashi refused to back down, but Naotora raised his voice, stating that the Kishin regenerated whenever it was struck with weak or shallow attacks. He questioned how Musashi planned to fight it, explaining that such an enemy required a full team acting together. He warned that fighting alone would never be enough, and that Musashi had neither fought nor thought deeply enough before speaking of grand dreams. Musashi hesitated, admitting to himself that the monster was overwhelming, yet he concluded that he still had to fight. He pulled hard against Shunrei's rope, severed it, and rushed once more toward the Kishin. Naotora watched and laughed quietly, allowing him to go, saying that anyone willing to risk his life for something truly mattered could be called a bushi. Kojiro stood frozen, questioning what he could possibly do. Ahead of him, the bushi formed up before the Kishin, surrounded by spheres of energy as they prepared a decisive strike. Kojiro overheard the servants whispering in fear that the bushi were aiming for the horn's core. Confused, he followed them to understand what that meant. Meanwhile, Musashi climbed to a high position, planning to weaken the Kishin by striking it repeatedly. He smashed into the mountain, breaking it apart and sending rocks crashing into the Kishin, forcing it to stumble and fall. The bushi's energy beam missed its target because and Musashi seized the opening, leaping from the falling debris and plunging toward the creature. Kojiro shouted to him, telling him to strike the horn in its belly to finish it. Musashi descended and attacked the horn with all his strength, but it did not break. The Kishin gathered flames in its mouth, preparing to incinerate him. Before it could attack, Naotora intervened, pushing Musashi aside and telling him that he had proven his resolve, but that the rest was his responsibility. With a single swing, Naotora cut through the horn and held it up, apologizing as he said he had taken Musashi's great moment. Musashi stood there, visibly shaken and upset. They jumped away as the Kishin began to collapse, and the servants stared in disbelief at the death of the being they had served for years. The bushi gathered around, drawing the Kishin's remaining energy into their swords. Musashi watched in silence, still troubled by what had happened, while Kojiro felt relief and joy, realizing that his father had spoken the truth. His eyes filled as Musashi told him quietly that he was glad for him. Afterward, Naotora and his squad stood before the captured miners and servants. He declared that the bushi would destroy every Kishin, and restore a world where humanity could live safely again. One of the servants answered with bitter sarcasm, saying that the same words had been spoken for 150 years. Yet that only grew stronger while the bushi continued their futile resistance, ignoring the lives lost in their conflicts. Naotora replied sharply, accusing him of dragging everyone back into despair by dismissing what seemed impossible. He continued in a steady voice, saying that he had grown up hearing the phrase impossible dream countless times. He acknowledged that some Bushi believed stability mattered more than defeating the Oni, but that many others sought a future without them. He explained that this was why they pursued dreams others called impossible, passing them on to the next generation before giving up. He asked whether the man truly did not want his children to live without fear. The servant fell silent as Naotora declared that he intended to bring an end to this era, that their generation would win, and that he would keep fighting for his comrades and his clan, asking for their strength to do so. Kojiro felt deeply moved, saying they were just like the Bushi his father had described. He asked Masashi what he thought, but Masashi remained tense, unable to hide his frustration, even as he noticed the people around them cheering with genuine relief. Kojiro stepped forward to introduce himself to Naotora and spoke of Musashi as well. Naotora turned to Musashi and admitted that he felt guilty for taking his first achievement. Kojiro responded calmly, saying that they had not yet been strong enough to defeat it on their own. Musashi's anger continued to rise. One of the Bushi placed a hand on his head and told him that the leader had saved his life and that he should acknowledge it. Musashi looked around and saw everyone celebrating, their faces relaxed. He told himself that maybe they were right, that perhaps he should let it go. He turned away, but Naotora called out to him, smiling as he said that Musashi had great potential. That even if he was weak now, with effort he could one day become like him. Musashi tried to hold back, but his restraint failed. He struck Naotora's hand aside and told him to stop acting superior, calling him a thief of rewards. Ashi bristled at Musashi's disrespect toward the leader, and Musashi shouted back. Laughter spread among the Bushi. Naotora addressed him calmly, saying that speaking out despite those around him required courage, and added that he admired people like that. Naotora handed him a large gem. Musashi asked what it was. Naotora placed a hand on his shoulder and said it was a small consolation, since Musashi had failed to kill the Kishin. Laughter followed. Musashi stood frozen, anger and humiliation settling in, and he remained that way until night fell. Later, Kojiro examined the gem, wondering about its purpose. Musashi took it from him and noticed a mark engraved on it, recognizing it as the seal of Aki province, meaning it once belonged to an officer. He looked into the gem and saw shifting, unfamiliar colors, like a moving pattern. Both of them were taken aback. Kojiro said he felt he had seen it before and hurried to retrieve his father's Bushi scrolls. He pointed to an illustration of a man using a similar object. Musashi noticed that the markings in the scroll matched what appeared inside the gem. Kojiro corrected himself, saying it was not a pattern but an Oni. Musashi understood then that the gem revealed Oni, and he recalled Naotora's words about finding the next Kishin on their own, realizing this object would guide them. Musashi continued reading the scroll aloud. It spoke of Hinamoto as land once ruled by humans, until the Kishin appeared and ended their dominance, killing the generals of the great warring nations. It said the Onai and the Kishin numbered more than 100, a revelation that left them stunned. Musashi found records of specific Kishin, including Engoku Tengu, the one they had defeated. Kojiro tried to see hope in it, saying they now had many chances to make up for what had happened. Musashi read on. The text described the Kishin as creatures of immense power, appearing in countless forms, and stated that if they used that power to trample humanity, they must be destroyed to reclaim the world. It called this an unfulfilled dream. It explained that the role of the Bushi was to compete in killing as many Kishin as possible, and that when this struggle ended, the fractured nation would heal. The greatest treasures would belong to the Bushi who defeated the strongest Kishin, and the one who achieved this would unite the land, and become the new ruler of Hinamoto. Musashi understood then the personal ambition behind Naotora's resolve. He went to confront him, asking if his true goal was to unite the country. Naotora answered with interest, noting how quickly Musashi had grasped it. Musashi challenged him to defeat the final and strongest Kishin. The next day Musashi and Kojiro stood ready before the Tatsuyama gate of their city. The miners gathered to see them off, wishing them luck. They mounted the motorcycle and set off. As they traveled, Musashi told Kojiro that without him and his father teaching him swordsmanship, he would still be breaking stones without meaning or direction, and said quietly that he was grateful they had met. Days passed as they continued their journey. Each night they set up camp, and each morning they returned to the road, having agreed not to fight with one another. As their supplies dwindled, exhaustion set in. By the seventh day their food was gone, and they pushed the motorcycle by hand under the sun. Weakened by hunger and thirst, Musashi finally snapped, asking why Kojiro had not brought extra food. Kojiro answered sharply, telling him to stop complaining, reminding him that Musashi had left all the preparations to him because he kept to himself and did not know how to handle such things. Musashi fired back, asking if Kojiro really knew anything about the outside world either. Kojiro replied that he did not, but since his father's death he had learned to rely on himself and manage alone. Soon after, Kojiro sat by the water and caught a large number of fish. Musashi watched in silence, shocked by how easily he did it. Feeling useless, he decided to compete by catching even more. While Kojiro worked, a strange girl appeared quietly behind him. Later, as Musashi sat alone without catching anything, he realized he had been wrong to leave everything to Kojiro and decided to go apologize. Instead, he found Kojiro lying on the ground, wounded by a sword. Musashi rushed to him and asked who had done this. Kojiro pointed behind him. Musashi turned and saw a girl approaching, introducing herself as Tsugumi. She bound Musashi and demanded everything he had, warning him that resisting would earn him the same fate as his friend. Musashi covered by throwing her off balance, but she recovered and landed cleanly, launching a rapid series of strikes. He blocked her attack with ease, only for her to sweep his legs and retreat. She drew a short blade and charged, and Musashi flipped her again. Realizing his strength far exceeded Kojiro's, she pulled out a powerful weapon, but a loud horn echoed through the area. She muttered that the captain would be furious if she was late, stole their motorcycle, and disappeared. She arrived at the Kusamita squad's base and presented the motorcycle to Captain Hideo. He scolded her for ignoring the schedule, and she bowed deeply in apology, explaining that she had taken the bike from the bushi as ordered. Hideo's expression softened as he praised her work and assigned her next mission, hunting Odi to help unite the nation. Musashi and Kojiro followed on foot, eating whatever they could find along the way. They reached a massive structure marked as the Kusamita squad and realized it was a bushi fortress similar to Naotora's. Kojiro insisted they enter no matter what, stating that the motorcycle was his father's legacy. Inside, they were met by Tsugumi, who greeted them warmly. When they demanded their bike back, she calmly said she had only borrowed it and would return it, guiding them deeper inside. Musashi sensed something was off and warned Kojiro to stay alert. As they followed her, Musashi was stunned to see an entire village within the fortress. Tsugumi explained that it was a flying castle, capable of moving quickly to reach Kishin. She described how bushi fortresses had to fly, and how the people inside maintained them. Blacksmiths, farmers, craftsmen, and doctors lived there, forming a community that had endured for over a century and grown into a family bound by battle. She led them through the busy streets, where people worked and lived with ease. Along the way they encountered Tsugumi's younger siblings. She scolded them for skipping sword lessons, and they protested, asking her to train them instead. She practiced with them briefly until she grew tired, then asked Kojiro to play with them. Tsugumi sat beside Musashi, and he remarked that he had believed bushi fought oni constantly, not lived among ordinary people. She agreed, explaining that although bushi squads were like families, she had no blood relatives there. She spoke of her older sister, her role model, who had wanted to be a kind bushi. She said all her relatives were gone. Musashi answered with a quiet smile, saying the same was true for him, then called Kojiro over to join them. Hideo arrived with a gentle smile, noting how well they all seemed to be getting along. He invited Musashi and Kojiro to join them for lunch and formally introduced himself. Musashi felt at ease with him, sensing kindness, but Kojiro felt uneasy and whispered his doubts about why they were being treated to a feast. Tsugumi cut in cheerfully, telling him not to worry and urging him to eat. Hideo spoke calmly, saying that after seeing their motorcycle, he found it impressed and assumed they must be first-class bushi who had defeated many Kishin. Both Musashi and Kojiro tensed at his words. Hideo then proposed that they join his squad and share the katetsu. Musashi asked in confusion what katetsu was. Hideo reacted with disbelief that they did not know something so basic, dismissed them as useless. At his command, Tsugumi activated her weapon, forming blades and tools from her ends as before. She fired energy ropes that bound both of them. Kojiro tried to cut through the bindings with his sword, but it had no effect. Hideo stood and addressed his squad, stating that anyone with such a motorcycle must be hiding katetsu somewhere. He ordered them imprisoned, and they were locked inside a cell. Afterward, Tsugumi stood before Hideo with her head lowered, apologizing repeatedly and calling herself foolish and useless. He forced her to repeat the words again and again, telling her she was a failure and asking if she truly could not understand their situation. She answered quietly. He reminded her that after repeated battles with the Oni, they had lost both squad members and katetsu. Drawing closer, he said that Tokugawa had left him this land, and that he had to protect it at all costs. He added that the next Oni attack might force him to conscript the entire castle village. Tsugumi reacted in shock and protested that most of the adults were women and elders, not to mention children, and that it was wrong to expect them to fight to the death against Oni. Hideo paused, then said that bushi squads existed to fight Oni, and asked whether it would not be the greatest honor for a bushi to fight until their final breath. Tsugumi broke down in fear as he raised his voice, accusing her of not understanding. She was forced to agree with him. His tone shifted as he told her that without him, she had no value. Later, Tsugumi went to the cell where Musashi and Kojiro were being held. Her expression was unsettled, as though she had just finished crying. She asked them quietly if they could give her the katetsu they possessed. Musashi demanded to know what this katetsu was that everyone kept talking about. Realizing they truly did not know, Tsugumi explained that when Oni bodies are destroyed, shining iron sand appears and that sand is called katetsu. Musashi recalled how Naotora and his squad had absorbed something like that after the battle. Tsugumi continued, explaining that katetsu held strange powers that the bushi used to fight the Oni, and that it was necessary for the coming battle. Musashi asked what battle she meant. She told him that an army of Oni was advancing toward the castle. Her body began to tremble as fear took hold. Musashi watched her closely and asked if she was hiding something, telling her that if there was something she wanted to say, she should say it. He noticed her hand gripping her clothes tightly. At that moment, Tsugumi broke down, shouting as if she had been holding it in for a long time. She said she did not want the people of the village to die, and that she did not want them all forced into war. She cried and begged not to be made to think about such things, then turned and ran away, wishing that someone would tell her what she should do. As the Oni drew close to the castle, Kojiro used a chain to catch the key, pulling it toward him and freeing them both. They rushed out, first searching for their motorcycle. Masashi noted that his weapon had been taken as well and insisted they find it, but their attention was pulled to the distance, where the approaching Oni army became visible, filling them with dread. Elsewhere, Tsugumi continued running through tears until she encountered Hideo. He told her the attack had begun and that all villagers would now be recruited, armed and ordered to defend their homeland. Tsugumi froze, unable to protest. Hideo placed his hand on her head and said he was counting on her. She smiled weakly through tears, recalling Musashi's words about speaking up when something mattered. Gathering her courage, she told Hideo she opposed recruiting the villagers. His expression hardened. He drew back his fist, and she shouted that she would never back down. Hideo shifted tactics, feigning deep disappointment and sorrow, making her feel guilty and shaken. Then he dropped the act, grabbed her, and threw her against the wall, calling her useless and ordering her to leave the castle forever and survive alone in the wild. Overwhelmed by fear, Tsugumi broke down. Hideo added that he might forgive her if she obeyed him. Desperate, she agreed, begging him not to abandon her. He set her down and told her coldly that she could not let her act without him, then walked away. Left alone, Tsugumi wept, remembering her older sister standing in the same place years earlier, enduring the same words from Hideo about being worthless and incapable without him. Facing her sister's image, Tsugumi finally understood what she had suffered, how her confidence had been stripped away until nothing remained. She resolved then to defy Hideo and protect the villagers. Yet the image seemed to speak back, echoing Hideo's voice, telling her she was nothing without him. She recoiled as the familiar threats filled her thoughts, imagining him taking control of everyone she cared about. The visions intensified, making it feel as though he still held her in place. The wall suddenly shattered. Masashi and Kojiro burst in with the motorcycle, asking where their weapons were. Tsugumi said she could not tell them, explaining that her captain had ordered them hidden. Musashi challenged her fixation on her captain, asking what he truly was to her. She faltered, unable to answer. He pressed on, dismissing the captain's authority, but Tsugumi replied that she was weak and foolish, believing she could do nothing without him. Musashi countered that she had defeated Kojiro on her own, that she was clearly strong, sharp-minded, knowledgeable about Oni hunting, and wielded an impressive weapon. Musashi mounted the motorcycle and reached out to her, telling her to come with them, reminding her that a bushi does not stand aside. The words echoed what her sister once told her. Tsugumi steadied herself and agreed to show them where their weapons were, asking in return for their help with something. She joined them, and they rode off, the vast Oni forces visible ahead. They soon reached the place where the villagers were being held. Tsugumi insisted they ensure everyone escaped. Hideo stood before the villagers delivering a speech urging them to fight, claiming this would be the final battle and an easy one. He spoke of the honor of dying in combat, but his words rang hollow. The villagers doubted him, saying their lives had been spent tending fields, not fighting. As fear spread and they tried to flee, guards blocked the exits. A smoke bomb suddenly extinguished one of the torches. Hideo looked up to see Tsugumi standing above and flew into a rage. She declared that forced recruitment was unacceptable, that bushi existed to protect people, and that sending the helpless to fight was a disgrace. Hideo shouted back that fleeing was the true disgrace for a bushi. Tsugumi answered that confronting the incoming Kodama swarm head-on was reckless, explaining that while Oni could be handled individually, their combined assault was overwhelming like a storm. She argued they should hide, let the swarm pass and then seek help from Tokugawa in the central region. Hideo rejected the idea, saying he needed no help and would send back nothing but Oni heads. Tsugumi questioned the value of collecting heads, suggesting it would be wiser to conserve strength to defeat a Kishin. She realized then that her role in his plan was simply to keep his attention focused elsewhere, so the others could escape. Hideo reacted with surprise, saying he did not remember her speaking so confidently, and warned her that if anything went wrong, his men would kill everyone present. Tsugumi hesitated, shaken as his familiar words resurfaced in her mind. Musashi's voice cut through the tension, declaring that no one should follow Hideo's orders. He and Kojiro leapt at the guards, knocking them out one after another. Hideo demanded to know how they managed it. Musashi answered that they used the smoke to close in on the guards while Hideo was distracted by his empty speech, and assured Tsugumi that no one would stop the villagers from escaping now. Tsugumi stepped forward, tears welling in her eyes, and urged the villagers to run. To her shock, none of them moved. Hideo threatened that if anyone fled, their families would be killed. At that moment, Oni began attacking the area. Tsugumi realized their fear was too deep to break with words alone, and reason no longer reached them. She chose to confront Hideo herself, believing that defeating him would give the villagers the courage to flee. Hideo immediately ordered his guards to seize the villagers and force them into battle. Masashi and Kojiro intercepted the guards, telling Tsugumi to face Hideo and make an answer for his actions. Tsugumi activated her weapons as Hideo advanced with his sword. She struck first, and he evaded. He countered, and she avoided his blows as well, pressing him with rapid attacks. He held his ground until he caught her off balance and brought his sword down. She blocked it, but he seized her leg, lifted her, and slammed her to the ground. Standing over her, he struck again, questioning who had taught her to fight, repeating that she was nothing without him. He turned to the villagers, declaring that none of them could live without him, and that taking their families away would leave them broken by loneliness and despair. The villagers cried out, agreeing with him. Hideo grabbed Tsugumi and called them all weak, saying there was no shame in it, that even animals survived by forming groups, and that everyone must obey him. He raised his fist to strike her, but Tsugumi spat blood into his face. The crowd fell silent in shock. She forced herself bright and said she was done listening to him. Hideo shouted back that she could do nothing without him. She answered that she would act anyway, weak or uncertain, because she had chosen to fight. Energy surged from her as she charged. Hideo fired an energy arrow, but she dodged and spoke to the villagers, telling them she understood their fear of losing what they loved. She asked what would happen tomorrow and the days after, warning that as long as they followed him, something precious would always be taken from them. She told them that if they truly wanted to protect those they loved, now was the time to fight. Hideo launched more arrows. Tsugumi closed the distance, bound him with energy ropes, lifted him with all her strength, and slammed him into the ground. Hideo lost consciousness. Tsugumi shouted for the villagers to run, and this time they did, escaping before the Oni reached them. When they were safe, Tsugumi remained behind, accepting that she might not survive as the Oni closed in. At the last moment, Musashi and Kojiro arrived on the motorcycle and pulled her aboard. Musashi told her calmly that she had turned out to be strong, just as he expected. After the Oni withdrew, the villagers returned to the castle site and found it completely destroyed. Kojiro noticed that, despite the loss, the villagers seemed relieved and more at ease than before. An elderly woman approached Musashi and Kojiro, pleading with them to take Tsugumi away. Tsugumi refused firmly, saying she would not abandon the village or the people she had lived with for years. Musashi asked the woman why she insisted on sending Tsugumi away if she wished to stay. The woman explained they were not trying to drive her off, but feared for her safety. She said Hideo had likely lost control after being deceived by those he ruled, and that his obsession with Tsugumi would only deepen. If he found her again, he would manipulate her once more. Tsugumi answered that she was fine and would no longer follow his commands. The woman asked if she was truly certain. Tsugumi hesitated, unable to respond. The woman held her tightly and warned that Hideo would hunt her if she stayed, and that she had to leave the castle. Tsugumi spoke through tears, saying the sounds of training, the scent of the fields, and her memories with her sister were all there, and that she did not know how to leave them behind. She cried, saying she would miss everything deeply. Moved by her words, the villagers told her she could stay and that they would protect her. Without warning, Tsugumi changed her mind. She turned to Musashi and Kojiro and asked if she could join them, saying she had no plan of her own. Musashi agreed immediately. Tsugumi went to prepare herself so they could depart the next day. That night, Tsugumi sat alone, crying quietly. Musashi came to her and told her she should rest, then asked what made her decide to leave. She said it was better for everyone. She admitted she had allowed Hideo to decide everything for her before, and feared that if she stayed, she might fail to resist him again. If she became his puppet once more, she could harm the villagers instead of protecting them. She spoke of feeling weak and ashamed. Musashi told her that was not weakness, and that anyone would struggle to part from those who raised them. She answered that Hideo was not her real father, and found that thought unsettling. Musashi considered her words and said that if her parents were gone and someone older had cared for her, it was natural to rely on them. He told her that he had seen Kojiro's father, that he loved him, learned swordsmanship from him, and gained his dream through him. He then asked if she had a dream. Tsugumi remembered telling her sister that she wanted to become a kind bushi one day. She told Musashi that she had always depended on others to protect her, and that she needed to become stronger to achieve that dream. The next morning, they said farewell to the villagers and set off on the motorcycle. The children in the village ran alongside them, waving goodbye to Tsugumi. She waved back with tears in her eyes, promising herself that she would return one day stronger and more confident. As she cried again, Musashi and Kojiro teased her gently to calm her. Musashi felt content that their journey, which had begun with 2 people, now included a third. Looking into the gem he received from Naotora, he told Kojiro that they would soon encounter a blue kishin. The following day Musashi awoke to find an Oni beside him, gnawing on Kojiro's sword. He chased after it and leaped onto its back, trying to break its horn with a stick. The stick shattered while the horn remained intact. He continued striking it without result until the Oni reached a field filled with swords embedded in the ground. Musashi noticed a strange man speaking softly to the blades. The man named Shiro turned to him and remarked that it was a beautiful sight, inviting him to try one. Musashi picked up a sword and dark energy surged from it into his body. Blades erupted from his form as he screamed in pain. Moments later, everything vanished, leaving only the sword in his hand. Shiro told him to cut the Oni. Musashi struck, releasing an energy wave that destroyed it. Stunned, Musashi heard Shiro ask if that had been his first time using Kitetsu. As the Oni's sand flowed into the sword, Musashi recalled seeing the Takeda squad do the same. The sensation felt powerful but ended abruptly when the sword broke. He apologized, but Shiro dismissed it, saying he had not needed the blade anyway, and wondered why Musashi could draw out such strength. Shiro suddenly placed a hand on Musashi's head and stared into his eyes, asking if it could be him, saying he had been searching for him for a long time. Musashi pushed him away. They were interrupted by a girl named Nanao, Shiro's sister, who told him it was time. She questioned why he still embedded Kitetsu patterns in the ground. He replied that he was content doing so. As she pulled him away, Musashi stopped them and asked who they were. Shiro answered that they were merely hired dogs, without names worth sharing. Hearing Kojiro and Tsugumi approaching, Musashi told them an Oni had appeared and pointed to where Shiro had stood, saying the man had lent him a sword to defeat it. They found no one there, and even the swords embedded in the ground were gone. As they traveled on, Musa described everything he had seen, certain it was no dream. He spoke of the sword's power, feeling as though it came from beyond their world. Kojiro asked what a Kitetsu sword truly was. Musashi realized he could not explain it. Tsugumi showed them her own Kitetsu and said an Oni's horn could not be broken without it. Musashi and Kojiro wondered how they could obtain one, seeing it as a serious problem. Tsugumi calmly suggested they buy one, explaining when a Kishin appears, Bushi move quickly to defeat it, and merchants soon follow to trade with them. The next day, they visited the merchants and found the area filled with goods of every kind. Musashi grew animated at the sight of so many Bushi gathered in one place. They noticed a man placing Oni sand onto a scale, which surprised them, and Tsugumi explained that it was used as currency to pay for goods. Musashi searched eagerly for swords, but Tsugumi told him that the Kitetsu auction was the main event and always held last. They stopped to eat at a nearby restaurant, where someone asked which squad they belonged to. Only then did they realize they had not even named their squad. The man left without another word. Tsugumi then asked why they had started hunting Oni in the first place. Musashi answered that their dream was to become Bushi and form the strongest swarm. She asked who the leader was, pointing out that without clear leadership, following one another would become chaotic and exhausting. Musashi looked at Kojiro and said the leader should be him. Kojiro was taken aback, expecting Musashi to argue for the role. Musashi explained that he had no family name like Takeda or Kusumida, and that a squad's name was tied to its leader's family name. That was why Kanamaki Kojiro should lead. Kojiro asked if he truly did not mind, saying he expected Musashi to compete for the position. Musashi replied calmly that as long as they pursued their dream together, he was satisfied. When the sword auction began, excitement spread through the crowd, and the gathering took on the air of a festival. It was announced that 25 swords, forged by master blacksmiths, would be presented, and anyone wishing for a sword should stand before it. Musashi hesitated, unsure how to choose. Mitsuru, the leader of the Ryuzaki blacksmith squad, told him that the right sword was the one he fell in love with at first sight, as swords and Bushi were drawn to one another. When Musashi said it was his first time, she told him this would be a special day, the moment he truly became a Bushi. Musashi and Kojiro rushed forward and chose their swords. When it was time to begin, Kojiro grew nervous and asked what he should do. Mitsuru told him this was not an ordinary auction and instructed him to grasp the sword's hilt. Musashi went first. The moment he held it, his heartbeat surged and powerful energy flowed from him. He remained holding it, unmoving. Kojiro asked anxiously what was happening. Mitsuru explained that Musashi was undergoing the sword's trial. She said the Kitetsu auction was about potential, not bidding, and that the sword chose its master. She described the sensation as a racing heart, a flow within the body, and visions of one's life, followed by the sword emerging from the body with shining wings of stone if the trial was passed. Kojiro took his sword next and mastered it almost immediately. Blue energy flowed from it, and he said it felt like the sword had become part of him, alive. Looking around, he noticed others glowing with different colors and asked about it. Mitsuru explained these were the colors of their souls, each Bushi possessing one, with the metals of the sword shining to match. She said there were 5 known colors and that strength varied by color. When Kojiro asked if his was special, she told him blue was common, shared by many in her squad, and that the other colors were green, yellow, white and red, adding that every squad needed at least one red. They turned their attention back to Musashi, eager to see his result. Inside the trial, Musashi felt as though he were standing in darkness. His heart beat loud in his ears. He saw Tatsuyama, his hometown, and sensed something ominous, stopping himself from moving closer. He then saw a memory of Kojiro's father bound and tortured, Musashi as a child crying at the sight, unable to hear the words the man tried to say. Panic set in. A massive eye appeared before him, releasing a sphere that transformed into a girl who approached and embraced him. For a moment he felt comfort, until her form twisted into something grotesque, tightening its grip and telling him she did not need him. Outside, Tsugumi saw black crystals forming at Musashi's eyes, his soul color turning black as more crystals erupted across his body. Mitsuru stared in shock, calling it the mark of an outcast. The crystals vanished, and Musashi dropped the sword. Kojiro rushed to him, asking if he was alright. Musashi said he was fine and asked about the black color. One of the blacksmiths replied she had never seen it herself, only heard legends about it. Musashi refused to give up and tried 6 more swords, but each time the result was the same. Mitsuru finally stopped him, telling him he could not use Katetsu. She explained that those whose souls shone black were outcasts, and no sword would ever choose them. Musashi asked if working harder could change that. She answered sadly that it was impossible, that a soul's color was fixed from birth and never changed, and that he had to accept it. When he asked what he had to give up, she told him quietly that he had to abandon the path of becoming a bushi. Musashi remained seated on the ground, stunned and unable to process what he had just been told. His thoughts drifted back to the day he and Kojiro shared that dream as children. He looked up and saw Kojiro nearby, then asked quietly if he had passed his sword's trial. Kojiro answered that he had. Musashi smiled and felt genuine relief for him. Without warning, a massive bull, like Kishin, descended from the sky, followed by smaller oni spilling out around it. For the first time Musashi felt true fear of a Kishin, now fully aware that without Katetsu, he could not defeat it. The creature charged at him first, but Kojiro intervened, unleashing a surge of power from his sword that forced the Kishin to retreat. Panic spread as the oni chased the crowd. Kojiro moved swiftly, cutting down many of them. People called out in thanks as he protected them, and their reactions strengthened his resolve. He looked at his sword and realized that with it, he could help others and receive gratitude he had never known in his homeland. Musashi, meanwhile, stood apart, overwhelmed in a way he had never felt before. Surrounded by ordinary people, he watched the bushi fight in the place he had long dreamed of standing. When the battle ended, Mitsuru's squad praised Kojiro for his skill and composure. Musashi felt glad to see him smiling, yet wished he could stand beside him. Soon after, the squads announced they would head to the mountain to hunt the Kishin together. Musashi called out to Kojiro, telling him to go with them. Kojiro turned away without a word and walked off. Tsugumi asked in confusion if they were leaving him behind. Musashi answered that it was probably for the best. Left alone, Musashi sat where he was, weighed down by frustration. His mind returned to the sword he had wielded in the desert when he met Shiro, recalling how it had responded to him without resistance. As he wondered about it, he sensed a presence behind him. Shiro stood there, looking down at him, saying he had seen the sword trial, and that the black combat aura seemed to have caused him trouble. Musashi bristled, thinking he was being ridiculed. Shiro corrected him, saying that was not his intention, and added that they shared many similarities. Black crystals emerged from Shiro's body, the same dark energy surrounding him. He told Musashi calmly that he belonged with them. Strangely, Shiro began to cry. He apologized and told Musashi that he was simply happy to have found him, saying that when they first met, he was unsure, but now he knew it was true, and that he had wanted to meet him for a long time. Musashi stood confused by his words. Shiro added that it did not matter, that he was not speaking to Musashi alone, but to the one inside him. When Musashi asked what he meant, Shiro explained that he was referring to the black stones, the reason Musashi could not use Katetsu. He said the same thing had happened to him, that those who shared Musashi's dreams would move ahead without him, and that he would be unable to stop them because he could not fight alone. He asked if Musashi truly wanted that to be the end, or if he wanted to grow stronger and catch up to them. Musashi admitted he was right and asked if there was a way for them to become stronger. Shiro said there was. When Musashi asked what he needed to do to use Katetsu, Shiro smiled and told him he only had to accept the black stones. He reminded him that during the trial there had been fog, that Musashi had lost consciousness, and said he needed to surrender to that sensation and allow it to take control. If he did, he would gain power. When Musashi asked how strong, Shiro answered by drawing his sword and carving a massive square from the ground. A towering block rose from the earth, and with a single swing, Shiro shattered it into fragments. Musashi stared in disbelief and asked if that power came from Katetsu. Shiro tossed him a Katetsu sword and told him to undergo the trial, saying that with the black stones inside him, he himself would become a Katetsu sword and reach the same power. Musashi reacted in shock, asking if Shiro truly believed he could become a sword. Shiro's expression hardened, and he questioned Musashi's resolve, asking what differs was between being human or being a sword. Musashi refused, saying that if he did, he would no longer be able to fight alongside Kojiro and Shigumi. Shiro paused, then suggested turning Musashi's friends into materials for his sword so Musashi would not feel alone. Musashi exploded in anger and rushed him. Shiro evaded and struck him, throwing him into the deep pit he had carved earlier, hurling the sword down with him. Elsewhere, Kojiro walked quickly, with Tsugumi struggling to keep up. She asked why he was moving so fast, why he seemed suddenly driven, and whether leaving Musashi in such despair had been the right choice. Kojiro told her not to worry, saying there was nothing they could do for him. He explained that giving Musashi false hope about using Katetsu would only cause him more pain. Instead, he would continue forward, search for the Kishin's weakness, and wait for Musashi to stand on his own again. Sugumi asked if he truly believed Musashi could. She recalled that Michiru had said Musashi would never be able to use Kitetsu, something extremely rare. She wondered aloud who Musashi really was, suggesting he might not be normal, that he might possess some hidden power or come from a powerful family, and asked Kojiro to tell her more about him. They stopped and Kojiro said Musashi's parents had been ordinary farmers. Sugumi was stunned, as that was not what she had imagined. Kojiro continued, explaining that he was son of the last Bushi in Tatsuyama. That his family lived on the outskirts because others saw them as criminals and avoided them. He said Musashi was different, the only one who had praised the sword in his hand instead of hating him for it. Having a friend like Musashi had given him happiness he never expected, and because of him, his life had not been entirely miserable. When Sugumi asked why Musashi had not hated him if everyone else did, Kojiro replied that was probably because of Musashi's parents. He said they were unusual people who ignored the opinions of others and treated him and his father with kindness, and that it had been tragic when they fell ill and died. Sugumi said it was still strange, wondering why Kitetsu swords rejected Musashi if he was truly ordinary, and concluded that without understanding that, they would never be able to help him. Kojiro had no answer. At the same time Shiro stood at the edge of the pit. Nano approached and asked what had happened to Musashi. Shiro replied casually that he had thrown him into the hole. Nano grew upset, saying Musashi had been kind to her, and that she had hoped to speak with him again before he died. Shiro dismissed it. She accused him of never understanding what it meant to be sorry, saying he must have told Musashi exactly what he wanted to hear, pretending to share his suffering as an outcast with black stones, just to get close to him. Shiro answered calmly that he never lied to her, admitting she was right and that was exactly what he had done. Nanao called him a demon who cared only about Kitetsu swords, saying he had finally found what he wanted inside that boy. Shiro responded with excitement saying he had. She asked if he was certain it was real. He said he was sure this time. When she asked why he did not simply take it, he replied that wasting time was what made life complete. Nanao did not believe him and said she preferred more direct methods. Shiro stated that he wanted the black stones and left, telling her to watch Musashi. Nanao remained behind, realizing he intended to use Musashi himself as raw material for forging a sword, and felt sorrow knowing Musashi was about to face the most difficult decision of his life. At the same time, Musashi was falling at great speed. Refusing to give up, he pressed his hand against the wall to slow himself, but it failed. He drew the sword and drove it into the rock, finally stopping his fall. Black stone began to surface across his body, weighing him down. When he looked below, he saw lava. Letting go meant falling into it, while holding on meant being consumed by stone. Either way, survival was impossible. Panic tightened around him, and the stones spread further. He struck his head against the wall to stay conscious, forced the stone, covered hand into the rock, and resolved to climb. A voice stopped him, telling him it would not allow that he had to hide now. His body hardened completely, turning to stone, and he fell into the lava. His awareness shifted to a sealed, unfamiliar space, drained of color. He heard the same girl's voice telling him he would stay there with her forever. He looked up and saw her, the same figure who had embraced him before and then transformed. She revealed herself as the Queen of Obsidian, born from lava that cooled too quickly. Musashi told her to release him at once, saying he had to help his friends. She answered that he could not help anyone, because he had no power. Even so, he insisted he had to go. She twisted into her frightening form, seized his arm, and told him they did not need him, just like before, asking him to remember. The world shifted, and Musashi was pulled into the past. He saw his parents' bodies among many others taken by the same disease. He heard villagers celebrating their deaths, calling it justice, saying Musashi was unwanted because his parents had helped the Bushi, and treated them kindly. He saw himself as a child begging relatives and neighbors to take him in, watching doors close one by one. Those who accepted him kept him hidden, ashamed to be known as sheltering him. When he asked why being friends with Kojiro and his father was wrong, he was beaten for thinking like his parents. From that moment, he learned never to speak of the Kanamaki family, understanding that closeness to the Bushi would only bring suffering. His days became filled with punishment and isolation, forbidden to speak or leave. He realized that when no one cared whether he lived, there was little difference between living and dying. Breathing alone did not mean being alive. He longed for someone to see him, to hear him, to care, wishing only to meet Kojiro and his father again. One day, a woman from the village questioned him and said she had a request, that if he fulfilled it, he would prove he was not like his parents and would belong. Musashi agreed at once, saying he would do anything. She pointed to Jizai Kojiro's father, and told him to throw a stone at him. She promised the villagers would accept him if he did. Surrounded and pressured, Musashi hesitated, then threw the stone through tears. The villagers praised him. Jisei looked at him in silence. Back in the present, the Queen of Obsidian told him he had thrown that stone because no one needed him. Because he was willing to do anything to be accepted. She said that was his truth. She told him his desire to become Bushi was only an excuse to stay beside his friend, that for him, swords and titles were no different from the stones he had thrown. That was why a Kitetsu sword would never accept him. If he could not fight, he would become useless to those he cared about. She said there was no way to break his will except by showing him the past. If he tried to leave and fight again, they would find her. Since they shared the same body in existence, they would hide there together forever. Her massive hands closed around him and Masashi turned to stone. On the other side, Kojiro and Sugumi reached the kishin and were startled to find it already down. Sugumi studied it and said it was likely still alive, explaining that when an oni truly dies it turns into katetsu, and since that had not happened, the horn must remain intact. Kojiro moved closer, saying that Musashi would catch up to them, and that they should locate the horn so they would be ready when he arrived. He examined the body and asked if the horn might be attached to the missing head. A voice answered him. Shiro appeared and confirmed it. One of the bushi demanded to know if Shiro had taken the kishin's head. Shiro landed among him and admitted it. He advanced toward Kojiro as the bushi closed in, asking again where the head was. He did not reply. Weapons were raised. In an instant, Shiro drew his sword, and the bushi surrounding him fell, cut down before they could react. He faced the rest with a faint smile, and said he had come for their katetsu swords, which meant they would all die. The bushi responded at once, releasing their energy and shouting that he was a sword hunter who killed sword bearers to steal their power, vowing to destroy him. Their combined attack surged forward. Shiro sliced through it with a single motion, the force shattering the ground and cutting them down. The few who remained stood frozen, unable to move as they witnessed his strength. Sugumi asked Kojiro what they should do. Hearing his name, Shiro turned toward him and spoke calmly, saying that the death of a bushi was beautiful. That when the body vanished the soul lived on within the sword, and that warrior and blade became one, fighting forever. Kojiro did not fully understand, but fear took hold. Shiro told him that the red-haired one, Masashi, had already become a katetsu sword and was waiting for him. Kojiro demanded to what he had done to Musashi. Shiro looked at him coldly and said he might do the same to him. At that moment, Masashi asked the Queen of Obsidian what had happened to him. She answered that he had turned to black stone and no longer needed to fight, urging him to remain hidden because she did not want him to die. As she spoke, she noticed a thin green thread of energy descending toward them. Her expression shifted as she said she had believed he would be safe within the lava. But it seemed they could still reach him. The thread wrapped around the stone encasing Masashi and pulled it upward. Nano appeared, lifting him out. She was surprised he was still alive and had not remained there long enough to turn completely. Remembering Shiro's words about turning his friends into materials for swords, Masashi broke free and rushed toward them. As he ran, the Queen of Obsidian's words echoed in his mind. He told himself that she did not understand, that the bushi meant far more to him than she believed. His thoughts returned to the past. After throwing the stone at Jisei and declaring that all bushi should die, Musashi heard the villagers praise him for the first time. Inside, he told himself that he was the one who deserved to die. That night, he went to Kojiro's house, knowing no apology would be enough. He found Jisei outside and called to him. He apologized deeply. Jisei simply invited him inside, saying it was cold. Masashi sat before him, eyes lowered, thinking of himself as irredeemable. Jisei spoke gently, telling him not to dwell on what had happened, saying he understood Masashi's situation and how he was treated for showing kindness to the bushi. Masashi said that Jisei and Kojiro had done nothing wrong. Jisei told him that Koji had been lonely before meeting him, treated coldly by the village just as Masashi was now and had been close to breaking. Musashi cried realizing how alike they were. Jisei held his hand and said that Musashi had saved Kojiro. That sharing laughter and tears with someone, supporting each other, was what made a person human. He said that brought him great happiness, and called Musashi a wonderful boy who had saved 2 hearts. He thanked him and invited him to live with them. Musashi accepted. He trained with them, learned the sword, and found joy in those days. Later, Jisei told him that a bushi lives by defining a goal and committing to it for life without betraying it. That was the bushi way. From then on, Musashi took Jisei as his model and continued his training. Back in the present, Shiro continued slaughtering the remaining bushi, leaving no path of escape. He spared a few only because his focus was on Kojiro, intent on turning him into material just as he had done with Musashi. He pursued him relentlessly, and when Kojiro realized this, he ran in the opposite direction, drawing Shiro away to protect the others. Shiro smiled and followed Kojiro until they reached a dead end. Kojiro drew his sword and released a burst of energy, but none of it struck its target. Shiro swung his blade, shattering the ground beneath Kojiro's feet and driving him hard into the wall. He seized Kojiro, tightening his grip, ready to finish him. Then he stopped. Masashi was standing behind him. The remaining bushi froze in disbelief. Masashi was alive and in his hand was a katetsu sword. Shiro stepped back slightly. Masashi moved to Kojiro's side as Sugumi ran toward them. Musashi said simply that he was back. Kojiro smiled and replied that he was late. Their eyes went to the sword in Musashi's hand. They asked if he had found a way to use it. Masashi answered that his soul color still did not appear, but at least the black stones no longer emerged when he held the blade. Shiro watched closely, surprised that the sword neither accepted nor rejected him. Nanao appeared beside him. Shiro turned on her, demanding to know why Masashi was still alive. She answered that she had pulled him out before the transformation was complete. Shiro called it reckless, saying she must have rushed. She mocked him, claiming she was simply eager for new work. Shiro laughed and let it pass, saying things would be more entertaining now. He pointed at Musashi and explained that he was only half merged with the black stones, meaning the queen had not yet made her judgment. If they attacked him now, she would be forced to decide. Shiro said he was looking forward to it. Nanao began gathering her energy. Kojiro tensed, but Musashi told him quietly that they were not the target. Sugumi asked why he had come if that was the case. Musashi answered that he knew they were in danger. Musashi and Kojiro prepared to fight together. Sugumi protested, saying they were far stronger than them, and that they had come to fight Oni not Bushi. Musashi replied that they were being hunted, and that running would only put others at risk. Nanao raised her staff. It split apart and transformed into multiple blades of energy, which she launched at them. They scattered, narrowly avoiding the strikes. Musashi tried to block, but there were too many blades, and he could not close the distance. He leapt upward, gathering all his strength to strike from above. Nanao fired a blade that struck him midair and sent him crashing back. Musashi rose again and said they should break all of her swords. Sugumi asked how that was possible. Kojiro answered that he had a plan. They took their positions and stood side by side. Nanao assumed they intended to attack together, and she remained confident, knowing the battle stood 7 against 3 with her blades included. She told them that no teamwork could overcome 7. Instead, Musashi and Sugumi suddenly ran in opposite directions, leaving Kojiro alone in front of her. Nanao hesitated, searching for the trick, thinking Kojiro might be buying time for their escape. Still, her attention stayed fixed on Musashi, and she could not allow him to get away. She hurled one of her swords at him. Kojiro spoke calmly, saying it was exactly as expected. Sugumi caught the blade with her energy thread, and Musashi leapt in to destroy the section of the staff that supplied the sword's power. Nanao laughed, saying they had only broken 1 of 7 and that it was too soon to celebrate. At that moment, Shiro stepped between them. Fear spread at once, as his presence alone carried greater pressure than any of Nanao's attacks. Nanao stopped him, telling him there was no need to intervene yet, and that she could handle them herself. She said it was pointless for them to fight together. Shiro looked at her with open contempt, and asked why he would ever fight alongside someone like her. When she said they never had before, he replied that weak allies only got in the way and that he preferred to fight alone. Sugumi felt a quiet sadness at the exchange. Shiro stepped forward and said that since the Queen of Obsidian had not appeared and boredom had set in, he would face all 3 at once. A black ring formed before him. Sugumi recognized it as his sword ring, the aura released when power was fully poured into a Katetsu blade. Until then, he had not used it. She realized they were about to see his true strength. Shiro swung his sword through the air. A powerful wind rushed past them, yet nothing seemed to happen. Confusion spread. Then a massive barrier formed, sealing the entire mountain. The Bushi warned each other to stay alert, unsure where the attack would come from. Shiro corrected them, saying this was a different technique. In the next instant, the world inverted. The mountain rose above them, clouds falling below. Nearly everyone lost their footing, plunging downward, while a few managed to anchor themselves with their swords. Musashi checked on Kojiro and Sugumi and saw they were still holding on. Terror set in as they understood that a single swing had done this. Seeing that some remained, Shiro sliced a small square from the mountain, causing one Bushi to fall through the opening. Musashi stared through the gap in anger. Shiro asked what troubled him, whether the fallen were his friends. He questioned why someone who wanted to fight Lee did not seek power from other Bushi instead. He said that if there was an enemy one wished to defeat, the only answer was to become the strongest Bushi and claim the strongest Katetsu. If that was all it took, he asked, why form squads at all, unless it was because they were weak and needed to cling together. Musashi felt the words echo the Queen of Obsidian, and he rejected them. Shiro swung his sword again, and those still holding on were cast down. Time froze. A gate opened, and the Queen of Obsidian appeared. She said she understood Musashi's nature. He asked if she had stopped time. She answered that she had, explaining she was the force that bound all things and had frozen light and sound for him. He asked about Shiro and Nanao. She told him they were her enemies, pursuing her power, and that if Musashi died, she would be in danger. She said she would use what strength she had left. She drew Musashi's soul from his body, telling him she had to ensure he survived. He asked if that meant everyone else would die. She answered yes. He replied that surviving alone had no meaning. She asked why. He said he was weak and could not endure alone, that he would lose what mattered and forget how to dream. When he stood with 1 or 2 others, strength filled him. He wanted to see how far they could go together. The Queen of Obsidian smiled, saying she once believed that kind of selfishness made him unfit to be her vessel. Now she saw that he had allies willing to face powerful enemies with him, and that his nature drew people close. She said that would be invaluable when facing the Kishin. She chose to place all her power within him and teach him to fight using his own body. She merged with Musashi and released time. Shiro reacted in surprise. A massive black sword appeared, and Katetsu blades across the mountain were pulled toward it. Shiro and Nanao tensed, realizing what was happening. Shiro said that even a single black stone could summon the hidden power within all Kitetsu and return it to its true master. The Queen of Obsidian controlled Musashi's body, his red hair turning black. She wrenched Shiro's sword from his grasp and spoke through Musashi, telling him he was unworthy of such a blade. In an instant, everything Shiro had altered was undone, the mountain restored as if nothing had happened. She addressed him again, saying she knew he had been searching for her, but that the feeling was not mutual. Kojiro and Tsugumi saw the Queen of Obsidian's sword ring, unlike anything they had seen before, heavy and terrifying. She turned to Kojiro and told him to watch closely and see how her power truly worked. Nanao hurled an energy thread toward the Queen. With a single finger, the Queen brushed it aside. Kojiro watched in disbelief as every attack was effortlessly deflected. The Queen explained that those who bear the black stone can control the energy of all swords, like a powerful magnet. Because this ability is so rare, those who witness the resulting vortex panic and lose focus, rendering them unable to wield their Kitetsu. That, she said, was the truth behind the legend of the outcast. Kojiro asked if that meant Musashi could block any kind of attack. The Queen answered with restraint, saying that this power was nearing its end. Her existence was fragile, sustained only because she had been resting within Musashi. Remaining active in the physical world drained her strength rapidly, and she would soon have to sleep again. When she did, Musashi would lose the power of obsidian. If their enemies came for him then, he would have to depend on his companions. She asked Kojiro if he was prepared to face such enemies alongside him. Kojiro answered without hesitation that he was. The Queen of Obsidian took her leave and withdrew back into Musashi. Shiro called after her, saying he had long wished to meet her and ask her to join him, claiming he could offer her more than they ever could. She rejected him with quiet disdain. Before returning to sleep, she chose to strike. Drawing in the energy of every Kitetsu sword, she addressed Shiro, reminding him that he had mocked the Bushi as insects because they fought together. She said that perhaps he was right about one blade alone. But when one sword's power was joined with the others, it could become something impossible to overcome. At the same time, within Musashi's mind, the Queen of Obsidian spoke to him, telling him this was farewell. She said she would remain asleep inside him, and no matter what enemy he faced, he must not die, because he was her vessel. She added that Jisai had died before they could finish what they began. Musashi was shaken and demanded to know what his father had to do with this, but she could not answer. Having already drawn in the energy of all the Kitetsu swords, she released that power toward Shiro and Nanao. The blast erased 3 mountains. When the light faded and the sun returned, Shiro was gone. Musashi returned fully to his body, his heart still racing. Despite the fear, he felt overwhelmed by the power he had witnessed. Kojiro and Tsugumi ran to him, stunned by what they had seen. Musashi told them it had not truly been him. Kojiro said he had felt like a different person entirely. Musashi remembered the Queen's words about Jisai and could not understand what she had meant. Tsugumi then asked about the sword Musashi was holding. He looked down and saw that it was burned and ruined. Mitsuru explained that Kitetsu swords shatter when they are forced to contain power beyond their limits, meaning no ordinary blade could withstand Musashi's strength. She offered to have a sword forged specifically for him. At that moment, a soldier shouted in confusion about a square hole in the ground that had not existed before, and reported that the Kishin's body was gone. Far above the sea, Shiro opened a gate and emerged with Nanao, carrying the Kishin's body and head. Nanao said they had nearly died, but that finding the Queen of Obsidian had been worth it. Shiro replied that she would not escape him again. Later, the Bushi held a funeral for those who had fallen. Musashi and the others saw children crying before their parents' swords. Tsugumi explained that Kitetsu blades served as keepsakes, carrying the emotions of their owners, and that many viewed them as symbols of a Bushi's life. Kojiro recalled Jisai saying something similar. Tsugumi added that she did not believe it because both of her swords had belonged to her sister. In the end, she said, they were only tools and nothing could replace her sister. When a person dies, everything ends. That night, Mitsuru welcomed Musashi and the others into her home. They thanked her, and she thanked them in return for saving them from the Kishin and from Shiro. Musashi then told her he had a request. The next day, Musashi stood before the same sword he had first chosen at the auction, now the only one left. Mitsuru announced that he would attempt the trial again in front of everyone. The crowd doubted him, calling him weak and foolish. Before touching the hilt, Musashi spoke to Tsugumi, reminding her of what she had said about swords being symbols of a Bushi's life. He admitted he did not know whether that belief was true. Tsugumi grew uneasy, worried about how the crowd would react after losing loved ones whose swords were all that remained. Musashi continued, saying that his father had respected swords and the Bushi path deeply, and that he wanted to understand that world better. He said the dead never return, but the things they cared for remain and deserve respect, because they prove those people once lived. He grasped the sword. This time, his soul shone red. Mitsuru announced that he had passed the trial. Kojiro rushed forward to congratulate him, but the surrounding Bushi crowded around Musashi, cheering loudly. Kojiro noticed that no one had reacted that way when he had passed his own trial. Tsugumi explained that blue souls were common, shared by many Bushi, while red was rare and carried great strength. Kojiro felt a quiet bitterness as attention shifted away from him. Musashi stepped aside and asked Kojiro to speak privately. He asked whether Kojiro had seen anything strange during his trial, any memories from the past. Kojiro said it had ended too quickly for that. Musashi told him that during his own trial, he had seen Jizai. He explained that the Queen of Obsidian had shown him a memory and seemed to know his father. Kojiro was startled. Musashi asked if Jisei had ever mentioned her. Kojiro said no, that all he left behind were the old scrolls, his sword, and the motorcycle. Musashi paused at that, pointing out that motorcycles were used only by Bushi, and none had existed in their village, while here they were common. He asked how Jisei could have owned one. Kojiro realized what that implied and asked if it meant his father had ties to Bushi outside Tatsuyama. Elsewhere, Nana described Jisei's appearance to Shiro, calling him the criminal who had kidnapped the Queen of Obsidian and sealed her within his own body. She said that since the Queen now resided in Musashi, their information must be wrong. Shiro disagreed, saying 15 years had passed, and it was possible the Queen had chosen a new vessel. Sugumi tried to speak with Kojiro, but his thoughts stayed fixed on the motorcycle. He realized he had always believed his father lived his entire life in Tatsuyama, and regretted never asking more. As the sun set, Kojiro gathered food and supplies for the journey and brought a map with him. Musashi stared at it in awe, having never seen a map of Hinamoto before. They marked their destination and set out toward the east. The next day, they realized they were lost. They had passed the same swamp twice and still had no idea how to get out. Sugumi argued with Kojiro as they pushed the motorcycle, annoyed that he refused to drive it. Musashi offered to take over, and they agreed, deciding to trick him by supporting him for a moment before letting go. As they did, Musashi sensed something wrong and turned back to see an octopus, like Oni, gripping them. He drew his sword and spotted the horn embedded in its belly. He rushed forward as the Oni tried to stop him, cutting through its tentacles. He released energy into the horn and shattered it quickly, freeing Kojiro and Sugumi. Musashi noticed the creature was holding someone else as well. He cut her free and found it was a young girl, who thanked him. Moments later, voices called out for a princess, and they realized the girl they had saved was the one being sought. They learned she was Mashiru, daughter of Nobumitsu, leader of the Saruwatari Bushi under the Yasuji Union. As thanks, she allowed them to escort her. Musashi sensed something troubling beneath her calm surprise that Kojiro and Sugumi did not notice. He tried to speak with her, pulling out the map to ask for directions, but although she heard him, she ignored his questions, leaving her servant to answer instead. Kojiro asked the servant if they were heading to Harima port for a battle. The servant confirmed that Isugi had called an urgent meeting to defeat a Kishin. Musashi seized the opening and asked the princess about her fighting style, expecting an answer, but she remained silent again. Kojiro shifted the topic, asking about the Yasuji Union. Sugumi explained it was an alliance of cooperating squads. Irritated, Musashi cut them off and directly addressed Michiru by name. She looked surprised and asked if he remembered it. Suddenly, the carriage jolted, throwing her out. Musashi jumped after her, but she saved him instead, her kidetsu transforming into an umbrella that slowed their fall. He praised her power. She replied that he reminded her of her father, who had praised her the same way the first time she used a katetsu sword. For the first time she smiled naturally and apologized for her earlier behavior. Musashi said it was fine and asked why she had been so withdrawn. She made him promise not to laugh and admitted she was reclusive, unable to speak when surrounded by many people. Musashi laughed anyway and told her he had thought she was just annoyed with them. She then invited him to travel south with her. He said they were heading east. She replied that they would not get far and asked if he had noticed the black region on the map. When he said yes, she gestured outward. From above, he saw a vast moving darkness. She explained that the black wall was a Kishin. Looking closer, he saw it consuming buildings. She told him it was said to appear in Hinamoto 150 years ago. She explained that long ago, a single Oni appeared that no human could defeat. Hinamoto split in response. Those who opposed the Oni became the Bushi, while those who feared them served them, building mining nations like Tatsuya and offering minerals to the Kishin. As it consumed them, it grew until it covered half of Hinamoto. They called it the Black Kishin. The servant added that defeating it had been the ambition of all Bushi for generations, as it continued to grow and threatened to consume the entire land. Musashi said it had to be defeated as soon as possible. Sugumi pointed out that no one had succeeded in so long and questioned how they could. The servant replied that the union's leader, Yasuji Tatsumi, one of the 5 great generals and among the strongest Bushi, would defeat it. He invited them to join the battle if they wished, then departed with the princess. The 3 sat in silence. Musashi wondered if Jisai had known about this. Kojiro was unsure and opened the scrolls. Sugumi shocked them by saying all squads possessed the same scrolls. Musashi asked why his father had one as well. She answered plainly that it meant he had been part of a squad. They stood stunned as Musashi realized Jisai truly had ties beyond their village. Sugumi added that each scroll bore a squad seal. Examining it, she identified the Isdecline's mark, meaning Jisai had served under them. They decided to aid the Union against the Kishin to learn more about his past. The next day, all Union squads gathered. discussing that whoever defeated the Kishin would become the clan's leader. Elsewhere, the Takeda squad moved toward the same destination. At the same time, Nanao shopped for supplies when a dark spark appeared on her chest. She went somewhere secluded as a communication began with the 8 Obsidian, others who bore black stones. They told her they had heard she found the Queen of Obsidian. She confirmed it was real. Shiro interrupted, claiming he was the one who found her. One of the 8 mocked him for being rejected. Their leader silenced them, stating they had to keep the Queen of Obsidian away from the Bushi, as she was needed to guide them to the Queen's treasure. It was their duty, he said, to keep the Kishin alive until coexistence was achieved. He proposed sending someone capable of approaching the Queen of Obsidian without driving her away. One of them volunteered to correct Shiro and Nano's failure. At the same time, Masashi and the others rode their motorcycle toward the port.